Hello, good morning and welcome to the Sunday Supplement. Coming up on today's show, it's a knockout blow for Manchester City's title hopes. They're beaten 2-1 at home by Manchester United. Football, though, it carries on a very different fight off the field. City, they vow to punish the racist fans who insulted United's players during that defeat at the Etihad. There is a silver lining at Goodison Park after all. Duncan Ferguson, he inspires his beloved Everton to a 3-1 victory over Chelsea. And Jose Mourinho, he salutes Ronaldo. Heung-min Son scores a magnificent solo goal in Tottenham's 5-0 destruction of Burnley. Here to discuss the sport's biggest issues, Andy Dunn is the chief sports writer at The Mirror. James Ducker is Northern football correspondent at the Daily Telegraph. And Ian Ladyman is football editor at the Daily Mail. Good morning to you chaps. Thanks very much for joining us this morning because, of course, you were at the derby yesterday, James, at the Etihad. Andy, so were you. Thanks very much for coming. And, of course, I saw you yesterday at the Vitality, which we'll talk a little bit about later on after Liverpool's 3-0 victory yesterday. OK, don't forget you can tweet the show at Sunday Sup and the best will appear on screen over the next 90 minutes. Let's have a look at the papers then. They do reflect on another day of shame for the sport. It's a race storm at the Etihad, the abuse mars Manchester United's magnificent victory yesterday. The City and police vow to investigate monkey chants seen in the crowd. We'll talk to Andy and James about those moments in a short while. Back of the Sunday People. Shameful yesterday. Spurs, though, another transfer story here. They're looking to Edin Dzeko, former Manchester City striker, now at Roma. They're looking to him to act as understudy to Harry Kane. The Sunday Mirror, hit and miss. Fred hit by a missile yesterday at the Etihad. Transfer story here, though. It's a no-go for Sancho. Jadon Sancho. Pep Guardiola has the opportunity to re-sign him. He doesn't want him. He's going to Chelsea, according to the Mail this morning. Reflection on the result yesterday in the Sunday Express. City, they're red and buried is the back page, but it's all about United's victory in the Sunday Telegraph this morning. Reds are go on the front page of their sports section. Christmas comes early on the front page of the Sunday Times. Marcus Rashford settling nerves in the red side of Manchester with that excellent and well-taken penalty at the Etihad to put United in front. They are the pride of Manchester. That's the Observer this morning. And his column, Brilliant Gerrard, of course, it's the League Cup final this afternoon in Scotland. Brilliant Gerrard has Rangers flying. Arsenal and co are missing a trick. We'll talk more about Arsenal a little bit later on, Andy. But a good place to start because, of course, your column earlier in the week when you wrote about Bob Willis, which I'd just like to reflect on because I know that you'd like to talk about Bob and pay tribute to a fine man. We know it's crossing sports, but we also know he had a great love of football and a fine man,
Absolutely.
of course, who passed away earlier this week.
Yeah, and United sports, United, English sports fans, him and Ian both in 1981. Obviously, for the current generation, they'll probably remember him sat in a seat like this, actually. It might even have been that seat, actually. I'm not sure it's been changed that much, but absolutely, with his coruscating opinions on cricket, he became known as that acerbic pundit. I remember him sat here after a test match against India that England had thrown away, and he was just at his best. I remember his last, the guys were laughing, he was going through, he was having to go at everyone, and he ended up by saying, and in that England dressing room, they're passing the dunce's cap round, and it's going from him to him, and it's ended up on the cherubic noggin of Joe Root. And I've always thought, just what a great phrase, cherubic noggin. I'm going to try and use that at some stage. But of course, that's what the generation of punters, of people now, remembered about Bob. But of course, for me, as being in the middle of my teenage years and loving all sports and loving cricket and football in particular, watching him perform when he did, it was just inspirational. And it took you back to an age that, just the sight of him, the sight of that, of his action, of that sort of mane of hair sort of bobbing up and down, the knees pumping. It took you back to an age of cricket and sport really, that you don't want to be all nostalgic, but it was a more, what would you say, innocent age really. Mm-hmm. We would sit there and score. So you'd have a scorebook and you'd mark down the dots and whatever. Now, of course, you're just straight onto Twitter to have a go with someone, aren't you? Every time you see something happen on the sporting field. Then you would sit there for hours in front of the TV, marking down the runs, the wides, the wickets, and Bob was at the centre of all that. And thankfully, that achievement of his, we've now come to remember and underline the fact that the miracle of 1981 was as belonged as much to Bob Willis as it did to Ian Botham. And those people who knew him far better than I did can only speak with just genuine warmth, genuine affection, and genuinely sad passing.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Fitting words and fine words on a fine man, Bob Willis, who passed away earlier in the week at the age of 70. OK, let's move on to events at the Etihad. Andy was there, James, you were there yesterday. Magnificent result for Manchester United, magnificent week for them on the field, of course, beating Tottenham, beating Manchester City, their great rivals yesterday. But let's talk about events off the field and the abuse and the monkey chants that were directed towards Manchester United's players yesterday. We will talk about the game a little bit later, but let's separate the issues and let's talk about the main issue, unfortunately, which has arisen from this game.
Yeah, as you say, we should be talking about the football and one of the games of the season. Sadly, there's yet another episode of which we seem to be talking about an awful amount in this country now. In the second half, as United won a corner, Fred and Jesse Lingard, went over to that side, and it's alleged that there was monkey gestures and apparently noises sent in their direction at that time. It appeared that Fred was also hit with a lighter thrown from the crowd at that time. The reaction has been pretty swift. I mean, Kick It Out issued a statement very, very swiftly after the final whistle. City have reacted very strongly. They've said that they will cooperate fully with the police investigation, which is now underway. If racist abuse is proven, they will issue a lifetime ban. Solskjaer came out and condemned it very quickly as well. And it's not a surprise anymore, unfortunately. I mean, we talk about sort of problems overseas, and we were discussing off air before about other issues, but it has reared its head again, quite regularly this season. I mean, we've been on the show in recent weeks talking about this exact problem again, and I find it quite depressing that in a game like that an individual feels that he's got to resort to that sort of reaction, and that he can even contemplate doing something like that. I understand sort of tempers run high. There is a real strong hatred from Manchester City fans towards United, but there are lines, and that is one that you just simply don't cross, and it's just the mentality. I mean, the one thing I'd say is, I mean, it has to be proven. I mean, it is subject to a police investigation at the moment. Solskjaer is adamant that Fred and Lingard are unequivocal about what they heard and saw, and he was very, very strong about it, Solskjaer, afterwards. Very interesting though as well that he was very quick to insist that this is not a Manchester City problem, this is a societal problem and an individual problem, and hopes the authorities will deal with it quickly.
The bit I really struggle with, Andy, is James talked about the hatred, mentions the hatred, and we accept whatever level that is.
Yes.
And we understand the passions and the emotions during the game. But what is the trigger? What could possibly make you take that beyond the passion, the rivalry, and if it has to be hatred for the other team, then okay, you hate them. But what is the trigger for actually making monkey gestures or monkey chants or insulting another player? And it's not just this incident, but any of the racist incidents that we could talk through over time.
Well, the trigger for that, as James alludes to, is beyond football. That's within that character. That's within a character who makes monkey chants. That's within him. That's his prejudices.
But you hate Fred so much, or you hate Jesse Lingard so much.
No, you have prejudice. You're bigoted, per se. No, it's not that individual. That's clearly deep-seated in you. That is the way you are.
The type of person who does something like that, if indeed it is proven, is the type of guy who probably makes comments like that in the pub.
Yes,
he probably thinks it's funny. He probably does it at home. He probably does it at work, and he thinks it's funny because he doesn't understand what it means. He doesn't understand what it means to the rest of us. He doesn't understand what it means to the people he's talking about. That's the thing, Ash, is that he won't just do that at a football match. Yeah. If indeed he has done it, he will do it. He will do it in the pub on a Friday. He will do it in the pub on a Friday night, and some of his mates will probably laugh along with him. And one of the things about one of the advantages that we now have in the modern age with CCTV everywhere and camera phones everywhere is that when you do it, you don't get away with it. And that is why, although this is another abysmal kind of episode in a series of incidents, at least he's been seen on camera. And the more that people like him get caught, the more like the guy at Chelsea gets caught, the more that happens, hopefully, the less inclined people will be to do it in the future. Because back in the 70s and the 80s, this was happening, and people got away with it. And now, happily, they don't.
But I think, and again, just going back to what James said, the punishment here is probably the key thing, isn't it? You know, we all agree how abhorrent it is, but the punishment is the key thing. So City say they'll if he's found guilty of doing these things, if these are proven, he will be banned for a lifetime ban, etc., etc., which is fine, which is what goes on. You know, that is the standard practice. But Raheem Sterling earlier in the season alluded to the fact that this isn't going to stop until clubs start getting punished. So do you punish the club for the actions of... So where do you draw the line of punishing the club? Does it have to be more than one? Does it have to be 10? Does it have to be 20? Does it have to be 30? Does it have to be a whole stand?
You have to
racist abuse. So when do you do? We call for countries to be punished, like we did when Bulgaria, when there was what? At that game in Sofia, how many of those people there? 100 maybe?
50, 100 maybe.
50, 100. And we called for, and they obviously have to play a game behind closed doors. So when do we start saying, well, the Premier League is subject to the same scrutiny that we demand nations are put under when they're guilty of racist abuse against English players? So do we just keep on saying, well, that's just a one-off? It's one guy, it's one moron, it's one idiot, it's one bigot in the stand, so therefore let's just punish him?
Well, what if we put this, what if we said, OK, let's say it's a handful of... I don't know how many people it is, but let's just say that this is a handful of people. What about saying, OK, you know what, you're going to meet Fred, you're going to meet Jesse Lingard, explain yourself to those guys in a different environment, away from the hostility of the stadium. Let's put you in a neutral environment. This is Fred, this is Jesse Lingard. Go on then, explain yourself.
I think that's a separate issue from what Andy's saying. I mean, I think that the country, well, the governing bodies need to explore and look very seriously at punishments and sanctions against clubs, maybe a tiered level of sanctions. In terms of that individual, I mean, Solskjaer himself talked about education, and something like that would be interesting. You know, you go in actually, boys, you know, explain to Fred and Lingard, you know, your psychology and where that comes from, and have an honest chat with them. Aside from this, in terms of education for this guy, if he is found to have committed these offences, his life is going to change beyond all recognition now. He's going to be banned from watching the club that he supports, I assume, week in, week out. What's his employers going to think? What's his family going to think? What people he's going to meet think? I mean, his face has been plastered all over the newspapers. It'll be everywhere. There is simply no hiding place for him. And the biggest education he is going to get, if found guilty, is the change that's going to happen in his life over the coming weeks. You know, that should make someone stand up and really pay attention to...
Mark Bright makes that point, that very point in his book, James. He had something very, very similar happen to him when he was being racially abused. He tracked the guy down and then at the last moment thought, you know what, you've got a mortgage, you've got family, you've got kids, you've got a job. And if I knock on your front door right now and make this complaint to the police, you'll lose the lot.
Yeah.
And Mark, however you judge him, felt he did the right thing and walked away from it.
I mean, that's an incredibly, you know, impressive stance for an individual who's been racially abused to take. This guy, that might be taken out of his hands. He's not going to have a choice now.
No, true, yeah.
Some of the people who speak most sensibly and most eloquently on this subject these days are actually the players. We were in the Czech Republic when Raheem Sterling gave a press conference before England played there, and he spoke very eloquently about this topic. Marcus Rashford, the same before England played Bulgaria at home. The players really have a very solid grip on what this is and what this means, and are more than capable of expressing how it feels. And again, I think the more you know, it's difficult because you don't, you know, footballers are footballers. They're paid to play the game. They're not necessarily paid to be kind of ambassadors and statesmen. But equally, those ones like Rashford and Sterling who are willing and enthusiastic about talking about it, the more that we can hear from those guys, the more the better chance we've got of this type of thing not happening, because they are the ones who are on the wrong end of it. None of us around this table can even begin to imagine what it's like. And the more we hear from those guys, those kind of testimonies may be as effective as some of the punishments.
What was interesting yesterday was, you know, I think Silva put his arm, you know, on Fred's head, and, you know, I think he obviously realised Sterling was right next to Fred, and he just had that look of, you know, on his face. I was just really interested to know what, you know, Raheem, in that instance, who's been subjected to that before, who's been very, very vocal about it, thinks about one of his own supporters allegedly directing that at another player, because I think we all know how he'd feel about that. And it's things like that, you know, City have had. This is a problem that they have suffered and encountered quite a lot in recent years. I mean, Yaya Toure and Mario Balotelli have suffered, have been subjected to monkey chanting repeatedly, you know, during their time as City players. Raheem Sterling, obviously, the incident at Chelsea recently. Their fans should actually be more aware of this issue than a lot of people. Their own have suffered at the hands of this. So, yeah, it's appalling on any level. But that I think the club will be distraught, to be honest.
The other point I'd just like to make, Andy, is when we travel with England, let's say, for example, Montenegro and England players were racially insulted in that game, followed by Bulgaria more recently. There is a rush and there is a stampede to say, OK, kick them out of the competition, close the stadium, all these measures. OK, well, let's transfer it to the Premier League. Why isn't there a race to say, OK, if your fans are going to behave like that, shut the stadium down, you can play behind closed doors.
Well, exactly. That was my point. And the fact of the matter is, we're all too happy to just say, OK, it's the actions of an individual, a bigot, an idiot, a moron, an individual, and it's his actions and his alone. So let's track him down, ban him for life, you know, expose him for what he is, and then that's it. We cannot. We are in danger of being hypocritical if we continue to berate other associations for their what should I say, inaction on the fight in the fight against racism, when we just are happy to go down this line. And that's my whole point: is that at what point do we say, right, you become the club's responsibility, and the club has to be punished?
Yeah, quite right too. I'd just like to point out, because we didn't get a chance in this part, because we've just run out of time, is about Chris Smalling and Romelu Lukaku, and a depiction in the Corriere dello Sport in Italy before the game between Roma and Inter Milan, of course. And Chris Smalling spoke very well on Twitter before that game about that back page headline. OK, next up, we're actually going to talk about the game itself. Big win here for Ole Gunnar Solskjaer and Manchester United. They won 2-1 at the Etihad. Welcome back. Let's talk about the derby then at the Etihad. James and Andy were both there yesterday. James, I was just looking through your player ratings. I've read all the match reports as well. You've been very generous. You gave Angelino 3.
Very generous.
John Stones 4. Kyle Walker 6. Fernandinho 6. Bernardo Silva 5. Gabriel Jesus 5. What's going wrong at City?
Well, a number of problems. Injuries are the obvious go-to point, and everyone refers to Aymeric Laporte's absence. I think they've dropped something like 14 points since he's been out injured, and you know, you lose arguably the best defender in the Premier League after Virgil van Dijk, and you don't have anyone who can come in and actually replace him, and you didn't bring a centre-half in. It's going to affect the team, but I think the problems are sort of a bit deeper rooted than just the defence, which is clearly an issue. I mean, Angelino, you mentioned that there, Ash, you know, looked just horribly out of his depth yesterday. A surprise, I think he started that game and at Anfield. And Stones in Otamendi. I mean, Stones has had a terrible 2019, you know, injury, poor form. Looks a bit bereft. And And Otamendi, I'm not convinced Guardiola trusts anymore, so he's been playing Fernandinho at the back. But in his attempts, I think, to sort of compensate for the issues that they've got at the back, he has messed around with the front six quite a lot. And certainly for months, you saw a situation where Rodri and Gundogan were playing together in the middle. And it was almost like two deep-lying midfielders, and they lost a lot of creative impetus going forward. And then, added to that, David Silva, sort of one of the great Premier League players, outstanding in the 2 title season wins. He's dropped off markedly this year. Bernardo Silva's form's been very disappointing. I mean, he was a revelation last year. And De Bruyne, at times it feels like he's been carrying, City's midfield. More recent issues, Aguero's missing, and I think Gabriel Jesus has got a lot of abilities as a player, but is he good enough to actually spearhead the attack in a side like that, which have got designs in the title? When you look at Liverpool's front three, I'm not convinced. And, Guardiola has he's been reluctant to sort of say this, but I think we can all see that there's been a lack of, there has been some drop-off in intensity terms. And is that natural after the level of effort that they put in over the last 2 years? I mean, it's an enormous physical and mental commitment to do what they did over the previous 2 years. And the spark has definitely sort of gone this year, and they're just not as good to watch. Yeah. I mean, the bar has been set so high that a drop-off was always going to be very noticeable. But when we're now talking a 14-point gap to Liverpool, I mean, it's admittedly an incredible pace that the leaders are setting, but it has been a very noticeable drop-off. I think they erred by not bringing a left-back in. That's a big issue. I think they are surprised that they were insistent all summer, so I wasn't surprised that they wouldn't push the bar out for Harry Maguire, but I think Guardiola have looked at his performance yesterday and thought, could have done with a bit of that. I think Leroy Sané has been a huge miss. I think he offers something that none of City's attackers do. He's probably going to leave almost certainly for Bayern Munich next year. So I think they are in need of a few players. Big disappointment for me is not seeing Phil Foden given a run. You can understand it in the last couple of seasons with outstanding players, midfielders at the top of the game, but David Silva's off form. Bernardo's been disappointing. Rodri, I think they missed Fernandinho in midfield. Gundogan's not been at the levels he's done. So when is he going to get a go? Because he'll certainly offer you some creative impetus. So that's a snapshot really of some of the problems that they've got.
It stems from the back. I mean, those marks that James given are just about reflective of their performance yesterday defensively. United looked like they were going to score every single time they counter-attacked. Literally in the first half, every single counter-attack looked sure to produce a very good goal-scoring chance, and there was 5 or 6 of them in that first half. And if you've got that situation at the back, then it is also bound to affect you when maybe you play with a little bit more caution going forward than you normally do, because you're so susceptible to the counter. And that basically is the fundamental problem they've got. And also, Pep's got these. You still have these. Listen, I still think that. I mean, I thought it was great to watch it against Burnley in midweek. And I still would, if I had to buy one ticket to watch one team in the Premier League, it would still be Manchester City. I still think they play just.
Would it?
Yes, they play great football.
This season,
the best football. Yes, probably this season as well.
Over Liverpool this season.
Yeah.
This
season.
What?
Yes. I mean, that would
That's his opinion.
It's quite easily. I still think Manchester City play the most aesthetically pleasing football to watch, personally. And I would if you go and watch them, they're going to play the game the right way. They're going to have what did they have yesterday? 71, 72% possession. They're going to try and move it round. But sometimes those principles, they just become extreme. I'll give you an example yesterday. Is that about 10 minutes, Nicholas Otamendi comes on as sub. About 10 minutes from the end, City get a corner. Corner goes in, directly in. Otamendi gets a header in and just goes wide. 5 minutes from time, they get a corner. Mahrez swings the corner in. Otamendi, bang, bullet header. Great header from a corner. Beats Maguire to the ball. Fantastic. They then get a corner in added time. What do? Play it short. It's like,
Oh, you want it in the mixer?
Well,
I thought you said aesthetically, style,
yeah, no, yeah, but
the world to world.
after 95
Get
minutes, it is 1-2. But what I'm trying to say is that is their principles. And I'm looking at it, I'm thinking, it was 94. I remember looking at my watch. It was 94 minutes and 30 seconds and it was 95 minutes. It was 5 minutes of added time. I even thought Ederson might go up, and Otamendi's going up there, and they play it short. And I just thought that, in a way, was just symbolic of what sometimes City can be undone by their own principles of doing things in that particular way. And I thought sometimes yesterday they were a bit over elaborate. United defended very well, but it all stems from the back. And the Fernandinho thing, that just smacks a little bit of pig-headedness on Guardiola's part, because you're losing him. You're losing your driving force from midfield.
Don't you think that's the point? Yeah. If you were to ask anyone who watched City regularly to name their 3 most important players, Fernandinho would 100% be one of them, and it's as much the fact that they are missing a proper centre half. It's the fact that he's been chosen to plug the gap. That's taken him out of that position that is so important to that team. Look at the way United scored the second goal yesterday. Rodri was the one who clearly should have been going with Martial from deep, and he didn't do it, and they scored the goal. Fernandinho wouldn't have let that goal happen. So I think that is absolutely fundamental, the fact that Fernandinho has had to be taken out of the position.
Lado, you're talking like a man who predicted a United win.
I don't know what you're talking about.
You do know what
I do know what you're talking about.
Yeah, because you wrote a piece, didn't you? And your payoff in the mail was that don't put any money on an upset.
I'm just delighted that you got to the end of it. Because not many
It's a first for everyone.
Not many people do. Yeah, I didn't see that upset coming. I wrote that I didn't see an upset coming, and I think that that points to what a magnificent performance it was from Manchester United, because I don't think many.
Maybe Ollie pinned your piece up on the dressing room.
Very
surprised. The thing is that you can see when they play one of the elite teams. Now, I'm not saying at the moment United are an elite team, but they have got elite attacking players, and when United play against, when City play against those teams, they are always vulnerable. In the same way that they managed to concede goals at Anfield, against good attacking teams, they are always vulnerable. Listen, you had a situation where Traore, Crotone, and Jimenez for Wolves. I mean, they made them look nervous every time they attacked, and that was Wolves at the Etihad in their victory. So that is how exposed and vulnerable they are, and they simply cannot retain the title with that defence.
Danny Murphy's piece, Danny, we need to talk Man United and the significance and just how important a victory this was for United and Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. Danny Murphy makes a point in his piece in the Mail on Sunday this morning, James, that, OK, it's time for the speculation about Ole Gunnar Solskjaer and his position at Manchester United after the week that he's had is over. Move on with allow him to move on with the team that he's got. Spectacular results at home to Tottenham, and particularly yesterday at the Etihad. Do these 2 results allow him to move on and manage Manchester United in the way that he wants to?
Yeah, I mean, I wrote in the week that it could be 2 huge shots in the arm for him, or a huge issue building ahead of Christmas. I think it's not just the results themselves, even though they are obviously huge because they had to get points and wins on the board. I think it was the manner of both of the performances against Spurs and City. I think the challenge, just on that point Ash you make, I think the challenge now is they've got a run of games, Everton, Watford, Newcastle, Burnley, traditionally the sort of sides that they've struggled to break down. This is the challenge for them now. Can they actually kick on and put a winning run together and beat those sides? Yesterday was the first time they've had back-to-back wins in the league since the beginning of March, which shows sort of the level of problems they've got.
His head I'm coming to you in a minute. Don't worry.
But on the what impressed me yesterday was, obviously the speed with which they counter-attacked was superb. But I thought the way they actually built up from the back and the way they sort of bypassed City and City's press. Fairness, it wasn't as intense press as we've often seen from City, was really, really good. I mean, they actually looked like a very, very well-oiled, coordinated team, building it up from the back. I thought they had outstanding performances from all the defenders. And McTominay and Fred were absolutely superb in the middle. I mean, it's the best performance I think Fred's delivered. And I thought it was a very, very, very strong team performance, and clearly, obviously, the front 4 frightened the life out of City. But I just thought from back to front, they were very good. I've not seen that really from United. I've not seen 2 performances like this from United back to back for a long time, and I think you're also seeing in Marcus Rashford a player that is now really starting to click, and I think it'll be very exciting to see what happens to him over the next 12 months to 2 years.
Why were you shaking your head?
Because I'm talking.
Not sure, I quite agree. Look, 2 enormous steps forward this week, don't get me wrong. And Fred was great against Tottenham as well, wasn't he? Didn't you think? 2 enormous steps forward. It was clear terrific yesterday. They have got great ability on the counter, as they showed against Chelsea on the first day of the season. However, if you look at the pattern of their results since Ollie got the job back in March, was it? It's still not good enough. And if you look at this season, for example, away from home, West Ham away from home, which I was at, abysmal. Newcastle away from home, which I was at, abysmal. Bournemouth away from home, abysmal. Sheffield United away from home, abysmal, apart from 10 minutes. So there has to be a more sustained upturn in Manchester United performances before I think we can put the Ole Gunnar Solskjaer debate to bed,
So
because there are still too many times when they are not good enough. And that front 3 that you talk about, who were terrific yesterday, there are still too many times when they are not good enough. The first 70 minutes of that game at Sheffield United, they looked like they'd never seen each other before. And some of that has to come down to the manager. Just like Ollie deservedly will get praise for the 2 performances he's just got out of his players, you still have to look at some of those performances and say, why have you got this level against Tottenham and Manchester City and that level against those other teams? And he has to sort that out. He also has to sort out a way for Manchester United to get more of the ball. Manchester United cannot continue at home as well as away to spend so much time out of possession. They can't. No matter how good they are on the counter-attack, they can't spend so much time without the ball. They just can't. So I just think that this week has been a terrific week for them, and you see what they can do. But in order for us to stop talking about Solskjaer, especially when people like Pochettino are out of work, for example, there has to be more.
Until Pochettino gets a job, is this just going?
No. How many games have they played this season? Is it 15?
They played 16.
And they've won 6. It's not enough. It's not enough for Manchester United. It's got to be better.
The point, if you combine it with, remember we had the week a month ago, like Ed Woodward week, when every other story was sort of basically Woodward either officially or unofficially giving his backing to Solskjaer. And the impression you got that week is that combined with this, then I take your point, Ian, but I do think that the hierarchy there now are of no mind at all. Ed Woodward called Lou Van Gaal a genius in January and sacked him in May. So, you know,
results will always dictate what happens. You know, the evidence is there, that is clear. The noises out of the club are that even if he finished outside of the top 6 this season to keep his job, look, I'm not saying if he finished 17th and they're in a relegation battle, I mean, it's not going to happen, but that he would do. But they do appear pretty wedded to him at this moment, and I would be very surprised if he wasn't the manager come the start of next season. Just on Ian's point is, the front 3, you do need a lot more flexibility, a lot more fluidity, but the midfield has been a massive issue. I mean, there has been a vacuum in that department. I think if McTominay can continue to make the strides, Fred continues to improve, and Lingard yesterday can turn up more regularly, it still needs a lot of work. Clearly, they still need players in that department, unquestionably. But it's one of the first times for a while that he's been able to put out what is pretty much his first team.
And to be fair to him, the
final point, Ian.
To be fair to him, the 3 players that they bought in the summer, the 3 players, the first 3 that they bought on Ollie's watch, the 2 defenders and Daniel James, to be fair, looked like very, very good signings indeed, and they could do a bit more of that. Yeah,
well, you gave Wan-Bissaka a 9, didn't you, this morning?
It became an 8 after the Otamendi header.
But
I mean, he
9 in the first edition.
He was a superb display from Wan-Bissaka.
What are we going to rate Everton's performance after their victory yesterday over Chelsea at Goodison Park? We'll tell you after the break. Welcome back with us this morning. Andy Dunn James Ducker and Ian Ladyman. Let's just remind you what's in the papers this morning before we move on. Back page of the Mail on Sunday, it's Ray Storm at the Etihad. The abuse directed at Manchester United's players yesterday mars their victory, an impressive victory for Ole Gunnar Solskjaer's side. City and the police investigate monkey chants seen in the crowd. We've talked about that in part one of today's programme. It was an impressive win. The Reds are go. James's paper, the Telegraph, this morning, reflecting on that victory. Pep's no to Sancho. The Daily Mail reporting, or Mail on Sunday, should I say, reporting that Chelsea in pole position to sign Jadon Sancho. It's a no from Pep. He doesn't want him back at Manchester City. The Observer's front page, it's the pride of Manchester that they are after that victory. City, red and buried. This talking about their title hopes. What title hopes? They're 14 points behind Liverpool, the league leaders, after 16 games. But let's talk about this man now. I'm quite excited about this. A throwback. Slam dunk. He was hugging everybody yesterday at Ball Boys at Goodison Park, shaking hands with the media. He's a happy man. The boy done good. And he done good. 3-1, massive victory for Everton. Lifted spirits, lifted the Ian and I were at Bournemouth yesterday, we should make that clear. But the atmosphere, it felt as though it was electric. Yeah. And that's just from watching the game on the television. But this guy can get the blood pumping, can't he? From the get-go, that's what he's done at Goodison Park.
That's exactly what he's done. I mean, I watched on the TV before doing the City United game, and I spoke to many people who were friends of mine who were inside the stadium. And yes, it was a throwback. It was a throwback afternoon, a throwback occasion when Goodison Park can actually literally shake, and obviously Duncan is a hero to all those fans, and you know his lads sit in the Gladys Street stands, and it's and a throwback is exactly what it was.
And you say his association with Everton. I'm fascinated by this because I did say right at the top of the show, his beloved Everton.
Yes.
Okay. It's not as though he's born and bred.
No.
I'm just interested in what makes Duncan Ferguson's attachment to Everton so special. What is it about his playing career at Everton? Because let's not forget, this is the guy who started.
Yes.
This is the guy who started at Dundee United. Yeah. Scottish international footballer. He's got his history. Everton, Newcastle, back to Everton as a player. So what is it that makes his association with Everton so special? Why is it?
It's what Everton fans, he embodies what Everton fans think their players should give, and that's absolutely everything, physically everything, not scared, tough, hard, committed in every game. Just though everything that Everton fans want from their players is to go out there, and you may not be technically the best player in the league, you may not technically be the best player in your team, but you know, as long as from start to finish you give everything, that's all they want, and that's what he did. He had that connection with the fans. He got that connection with the fans through the goals he scored. You know, he scored some memorable goals. You know, ones against Manchester United particularly spring to mind, and he just gets the club. He gets the feeling around the club. And that's why they love him. And obviously he gave them that lift yesterday. There's no doubt about that. You know, in the cold light of day, if you looked at the game, you know, I thought Chelsea played okay, actually. I thought Frank was a little bit harsh on Chelsea. I thought they played quite well. Everton, everything that could go for Everton went for Everton yesterday, which was good. But they also had that level of commitment that was a step up from what they had under Silva, and which was a step up from what I saw them have against Liverpool at Anfield in midweek. There was no excuse for not being 100% committed against Liverpool in a Merseyside derby. And I didn't see 100% commitment. Now, you can point the finger at the players. You can certainly point the finger at the players and say, yesterday they made, you know, these big stats going around, they've made 37 tackles yesterday. 37 tackles won, which I think is a record for the club or whatever, I don't know. But it's a big number, 37 tackles won. Two things. One, why weren't they doing that under putting that sort of shift in for Marco Silva? And two, the slightly worrying aspect is, should you have to make that amount of tackles? You'd rather have more of the ball. When I saw tackles.
It's an amazing stat. It's the best for a decade. But when I saw that stat, Andy, I thought, next week, if they make 37 tackles, they could end the game with 8 men, because that's the modern trend of the game. You miss time a couple of those tackles. Yellow card, second yellow card.
And also, you know, it was a fully deserved win. The place was rocking. It lifted the whole place. You know, in the end, you're having 30% possession at home. They're still not playing with any sort of great fluidity. But whichever way you look at it, it's a huge lift for the fans. and for the club. You know, the fans could not see a direction on the pitch. They could not see a philosophy. They know what Duncan Ferguson's philosophy is, and that's probably to get it forward very quickly. You know, play an old-fashioned 4-4-2, get it forward very quickly, get the knockdowns, be committed, tackle everything that moves, and if you don't, then you won't be in the team, and you'll certainly know about it from Duncan Ferguson. So they love all that. Is that sustainable game in, game out? I don't know, but it's certainly better than what's gone before. Of course, the situation they now find themselves in, Everton, is if they had a plan, and I suspect they didn't have a plan, because let's not forget, when they sacked Ronald Koeman, they didn't have a plan. They didn't have a succession plan then, and we know what happened then. They went from caretaker manager to Big Sam. Have they got... I think it took them probably 12 hours to sack Marco Silva the day after the derby, because they basically haven't got a plan. You know, there'll be some people, David Moyes will have some backers within the boardroom. Vitor Pereira has obviously got backers either trying to get him into the club or putting his name forward. And when a job like Everton comes up, you'll have 100 applications of you know, I would say, of you know, established managers. But maybe not 100 established managers, but certainly an awful lot. Do
you not think, Donny, that...
But now, of course, we're in a situation where they can't do anything now. They cannot make an appointment until...
No chance.
Until Ferguson starts...
Until this burns out, yeah.
A, they can. A, they can and they should.
They should.
A, they can and they should. A, they can and they should.
No chance.
What would you not give it to Duncan Ferguson now at the moment? I mean, would you not keep him in this job now? You can't... Surely before they go to United next week, you can't say...
If they have a plan...
Yes.
They should execute that plan.
I suspect they haven't.
Okay? If they have a plan, they should execute that plan. The problem at Everton, as you will know probably better than me, Donny, is that any plan at that football club has to be agreed by two people, which is Moshiri and Bill Kenwright, whether that be players, managers, and that to me seems to be one of the things that's continuously getting in the way. That they can't, you know, Ronald Koeman spoke to journalists once he'd left the job and talked quite openly about how difficult it was to manage at Everton when there were separate factions working at the club. And I think at the moment, although Kenwright and Moshiri clearly get on at a level, they sit next to each other in the director's box. You saw them yesterday. Bill was singing along. But someone at that club has to be in charge of making decisions.
Well, Marcel Brands should be in charge of making it.
Well,
you can't come out and put Marcel Brands on the board and say you are in charge of holistically the entire football operation. Well, then it's your job to come forward with the manager. What? Now, clearly, Farhad Moshiri signs off the cheques. So in that way, those two guys should be the most powerful people. Bill shouldn't really have...
You keep saying should. You keep saying should.
Yes, because you suspect it's probably not quite like that.
And I think until they get some kind of unified direction of travel at that football club, they will continue to make strange decisions. And I fear that they are about to make another strange decision with the appointment of the next manager.
Are you honestly, realistically going to get that Everton though? I think, you know, Moshiri, he was tied up with Arsenal, wasn't he, and Usmanov, and then he didn't really have the say that he wanted, came to Everton. You know, he's a strong personality. We all know Bill Kenwright's a strong personality. Are either of those two people really going to give an inch? I mean, I just can't see
well, they
that.
Have to for the good of the club.
I know, but there's going to be, and then you've got at the same time, you've got those two probably with different ideals. One of the theories at the start of the summer with Everton was that they'd trim the squad. They'd look very, very carefully what they did. They ended up going completely the opposite way. I think they spent £120 million. Marco Silva had his targets and players in mind. I think he wanted Pepe, various others went to Arsenal. Marcel Brands had his targets in mind. And then they all have to, like you say, get signed off by Moshiri. There's so many different people.
Do you think this happens at Manchester City? Do you think this happens at Liverpool? Absolutely not. You have to have people running that football club.
But you can't have two figureheads.
That football club, you cannot have two figureheads. Absolutely. If you want to make the right decisions. And I think they're about to make the wrong one again. And this circle will continue to turn.
Bill can advise, but you know, he is what you said. He's a figurehead. You know, he has not got the power in that club. He has not got any power. And bear in mind as well, as much as you know, people can say, you know, understandably how much Bill loves the club and how much he's done for the club at the time. They haven't been that successful during Bill's reign, basically.
Why did Wayne Rooney come back? Why did Wayne Rooney come back? Whose idea was that?
Probably Bill's, I would have thought.
So you say he shouldn't have any power at the football club?
Well, I'm saying he doesn't materially. You know,
well, there you go.
Moshiri owns whatever it is now. I don't know. Is it? I mean, it's 60, 70% of the shares. I can't remember off the top of my head. and Marcel Brands is in charge of the whole football operation. Now they can just go, and okay, I'm saying, I don't know whether this is going to happen, but they can just say, this is the manager that we want, and this is the manager that we want.
I think Brand's record.
But now, of course, they will be influenced by. Mashiri stood there next to Bill yesterday, and he's seeing what's going on. He's hearing Goodison, and he's seeing the crowd.
Danny, you know what? I defy anybody. Yes, to my mind, this is like a drug. Everton fans will want more of this. Yeah. What they saw yesterday at Goodison Park, even with their 30% possession.
Yes. Oh, yes.
4-4-2.
Fans don't appoint managers, though, do they, mate?
No, they don't. But you have to use what they had. The atmosphere at Everton yesterday. You have to use that to move.
Of course,
you want more of that.
But then that brings in a whole wider point about how. I mean, for example, so then when you get days like yesterday, and days like nighttime games that we've had the club has had over previous years when the places that going back then. But then, so do you ever want to move stadium? Do you have to progress? So do you have to say, well, okay, well, Everton in 3 or 4,
I'd be
5
the fan.
years' time.
The fan that's 3 hours after the game's finished, still on the terraces with their scarf wrapped round.
They're Goodison.
Yeah, I'd be the one. Oh, he's still there.
But the whole point is
nostalgic and.
But the whole point is then,
dewy-eyed.
It's okay. We've used probably the word throwback, 4 or 5 times in this segment of the show. So that's okay when it's a great day like that.
Yeah.
But then when you start drawing or losing games, you don't want to throw back. Well, why haven't we advanced? Why haven't we got a manager with a sophisticated tactical plan? Why haven't we got a state-of-the-art stadium like Spurs have?
I mean, that's
when you start saying, are we trying to enter that bracket? But now actually, what Everton want now is back to big dunk days and Goodison Rocket and get amongst them.
That looked magnificent. The image of the ball boy in his arms. I know everyone's doing it now. Now Jose did it. That was just so. I mean, you can't look at that and not smile, can you?
No,
it's absolutely
fantastic.
magnificent. But I would suggest that is probably what we saw yesterday. Was a short-term drug. And I think what they need is...
let's live the moment. Sorry.
They don't need Vito Pereira, that's for sure.
If they get a short-term bounce out of it and they have a carefully constructed plan that they can then hit the button on. I mean, bringing a manager in now into this Christmas period is a tough old...
Well, I'll be happy with Duncan Ferguson this morning. Big win for Everton yesterday, beat Chelsea 3-1. I did say we'd talk about Chelsea and the transfer ban being lifted in this part. Let's talk about it in part 4 instead. Just talking about managers who name-check journalists in press conferences. As long as it's not Andre Villas-Boas, I'm happy. That's going back a bit. I want to talk about this story. It's on the back of the Mail on Sunday. Chelsea set to bid. On any other day, this would be a back page story across the back page. Of course, events elsewhere at the Etihad, of course, took precedence and prominence in today's papers, quite rightly so. To my mind, Joe, this is an extraordinary story because Jadon Sancho is 19 years old. Rob Draper says that Chelsea will pay £100 million for him in the summer. Now, we know, of course, that their transfer ban has just been cut to one window, so they can sign players in January. Rob says this deal is likely to take place in the summer. I think it's a remarkable amount of money, no matter how good he is. He's 19 years old. Is he worth it?
Join the queue. I mean, the price is the price because there's such a great interest in him. United didn't quite. He was one of Solskjaer's principal transfer targets last year, and United, Borussia Dortmund made it abundantly clear that they wouldn't be selling him that summer unless there was a fee of at least £100 million, and that hasn't changed despite some of the issues that he's obviously, some of the loggerheads that he's at with the Dortmund hierarchy and the coach, but. It is an incredible amount of money for a player who has not done anything, obviously, in the Premier League. He spent his time, obviously, in the Bundesliga. I think he scored 2 again, didn't he, yesterday?
7 goals, 7 assists this season in 12.
He's done superbly. City were gutted to let him go. But the price will remain high because Man United want him, Chelsea want him, there is an interest from Liverpool in him. Paris Saint-Germain's interest is cooled, but both of the big hitters in Spain, Real Madrid and Barcelona, are keeping tabs on developments as well. Dortmund will get a huge price for him because there is a premium now on forward players of that age who fit that sort of profile, can play numerous positions in the modern game. And there's a double premium for the Uniteds and the Chelseas with him being English. So, is he worth that amount of money? I mean, it's a crazy sum for a player who's had was in his second full season now as a senior pro. I mean, it's a startling amount of money, but this unfortunately is now where the game has gone, and obviously the issue is it leaves no hiding place for someone like Sancho. I think you come and you're going to expect an instant impact, but I think equally, clubs will bring a player like that in, and I think that they think, well, if it works, we're going to get a long time out of him.
But the other point I'd like to make here is, if you're Frank Lampard making your first significant signing as the Chelsea manager, and, for example, Marina Granovskaya or those above her say, Jadon Sancho is yours, 100 million, yes or no? And you're Frank Lampard making your first big signing, first statement signing as Chelsea manager. That's not an easy position. The point I'm making is that's not an easy place to be.
But you say, I'd imagine you say yes because you're a very good player.
Then he better be player of the year for that.
Absolutely, but managers know these days that the kind of the book for transfers doesn't necessarily stop with them these days. So Frank knows that any intelligent Chelsea fan knows it's not necessarily going to be Frank who's essentially signing the players. It's Frank's job.
Particularly when it goes badly.
You know what? I spoke to, you mentioned, we were talking about Brendan Rodgers in the break. I was talking to Brendan Rodgers recently about what happened when he left Liverpool and the way that he was upset about the transfer committee at Liverpool not allowing him to sign the players that he wanted. And I said, does that still rankle with you? And he said, no. He said, because I've worked out now that's not my remit. He said, I know what the role of the modern coach is now. The role of the modern coach stroke manager is to work with the players that you have either through the academy or given by the club. Essentially, Brendan was saying, we don't sign the players anymore. And I think for Frank, he will probably be able to not hide behind that, but he'll know that people understand that. So going back to your original question, Frank won't care, I would imagine, that's how much Sancho costs. If he's given a player of that quality to fit into that team, I just imagine we're very happy indeed.
Isn't he asked, or isn't it his job to turn around and say, for example, OK, listen, you're going to get Sancho for £100 million for me. I don't think he's any better than Callum Hudson-Odoi, who you've just got to sign a new long-term deal at Chelsea, having looked as though he actually might go to Germany himself. Now, are you saying, can Hudson-Odoi and Sancho play in that same team with, I'm not sure they can. I mean, I still think the job of a manager, I understand what you're saying, but I still think the job is for him to turn around and say, look, this is my point of view, how you best spend your money. And Sancho's a brilliant player, and if I was Frank Lampard, I would say, I'll have him. I rate him higher than I rate Hudson-Odoi. But I'm not sure Frank Lampard does.
Remember,
so sure, it's up to Lampard to turn around and say, yes.
We're talking squads, Donny, aren't we?
Well, I'll tell you what, if they bought... we know how Hudson-Odoi reacted when... And he's only the same age as Sancho, I would have thought. I'm not sure round about that. And we saw how he reacted when he couldn't get into the team under Maurizio Sarri. He was off. He was going to go. So if Sancho came, surely this is what the dynamics that Frank has to consider as well. If Sancho comes and Hudson-Odoi suddenly finds that he's not, it's a squad game, but he's not getting his position in the team.
So yesterday at Bournemouth, where we were, there's a Liverpool team with no Mane in it, no Wijnaldum in it, no Fabinho in it, and they have the players that come through and they win 3-0.
Yeah. And 5-2 in the week.
They made 7 changes. Frank will know that Chelsea need to be in that situation. Yeah. At the moment, Chelsea look quite good 1-11. How good do they look 1-16?
I understand that, but you're not signing Sancho as a squad player, are you?
Well,
or Hudson-Odoi would not see himself as a squad player.
Well, a squad player. When I say squad player, I don't mean somebody who just plays in the League Cup. I mean someone who's going to be on the bench every week and then in the team and then out, which you need to be at that age, by the way, because as Mason Mount, I'm sure we'll find out, nobody at that age can expect to play through a whole season.
Interesting with Sancho is when he left City, he basically he stopped turning up that summer, and he will argue that he was basically told to stay away. City were like, he's not showing up, and he left because he wanted out. He didn't see a clear route to the first team at City, and I think he'll probably look at Phil Foden now and think, I made the absolutely made the right call. And then in recent weeks, when we returned late from international duty with England, got dropped at the back of it. There'd been other issues around time.
He was taken off after half an hour against Bayern, wasn't
and he was left very upset by that. I mean, they were 1-0 down at that time.
Yeah.
I think he felt he was made a bit of a scapegoat. He thought it was humiliating, particularly given the contributions he's made to that team over the past year. Been other issues on timekeeping. Whether it's all part of a strategy ahead of what's going to be a summer move, we'll just have to see. But he will take, for all his talent, and he's an outstanding talent. You know, to speak to people at City who've seen it go through. He's an outstanding talent, but he will take some management. He will absolutely take some management. And £100 million is an enormous commitment.
It's a big sum of money, yeah. Okay. You just mentioned, of course, we were at Bournemouth, Liverpool yesterday. Quick word on them as well, Ian, because they looked very, very comfortable. They kept Bournemouth at arm's length yesterday at the Vitality Stadium. 33 games unbeaten now in the Premier League.
And you keep wondering if they're going to slip up. I'm sure they will slip up at some point. I don't think they'll go through the season unbeaten. But that performance yesterday is the type of thing that when City are and were in their pomp, they used to do. They just used to turn up at away games and just stroll. Well, they look like they're strolling through them, not in danger. I don't think Bournemouth had a shot on target. A very understrength Bournemouth team, to be fair. They've got an awful lot of injuries. But what Klopp is doing at the moment, and I don't want to repeat myself, but he's rotating that squad quite nicely at the moment. He knows we've got a hell of a month coming up with the World Club Cup and things like that. Very, very impressive yesterday. Naby Keita was magnificent, as I kept banging on to you about on the train on the way home.
So much so, I've written all about him.
Me too. I did persuade you.
Train journey,
I did persuade you. Joe Gomez came in, played very well in two positions, and of course he scored some lovely goals. That train does not show any signs of slowing down at the moment.
Although the train that we were on yesterday definitely slowed
Never showed
down,
any signs of
because we were
speeding
half
up.
an hour late into Waterloo last night, weren't we? Okay, big win though, an important win, an impressive win for Liverpool yesterday against Bournemouth. Okay, lots more to talk about. We're going to talk about Arsenal. Who's going to get that job? They need to find someone, and quick. I'm convinced, you guys weren't here last week, but that Christmas tree has doubled in size over the last 7 days. I don't know which is bigger, this one or the one in Trafalgar Square, Andy?
You've got one on that side in your living room, haven't you?
It's not that big.
Christmas tree formation.
Christmas tree, love it.
No presents under it, though.
Love it. What formation does Freddie Ljungberg go with tomorrow night against West Ham, James? Because this trend of turning to an alleged legend to take charge of a team for a few weeks while clubs work out what they're going to do next hasn't quite worked out in Arsenal's favour just yet. Can he turn it around?
No, it's definitely not started well, has it? I think in speaking to guys who cover Arsenal more regularly, I think they would like a scenario where Ljungberg can maybe see the season out and they can get all the ducks in a row in a point from the summer, but I don't know how realistic that will end up being. You look at that team and they do have a lot. I mean, David Luiz has had a dreadful time of it in defence, hasn't he? I mean, the midfield's been a big issue. I know quite a bit's been written about the loss of Aaron Ramsey, but they absolutely look like, they were missing him. I think the statistics last season showed that. I think they won over 70% of the games when he was playing, and just 50 or so when he was missing. And they look like a club that I think post Wenger initially looked like they had a plan and they knew what they were doing. And a couple of years down the line, you look at that squad and you think it's going to be difficult for any manager coming in. I think they need a significant number of players. I mean, everyone talks about how much Man United need. Arsenal need a lot of players, I think, to not just produce a first team that can get back up to the title, but a first team that can, compete regularly for the top four again. And there's talk about Lacazette and Aubameyang's contract talks slowing again. I mean, they're absolutely, obviously fundamental to what Arsenal want to do. So whoever does come in, I think it is an enormous job on the hands. And we talked earlier about factions at Everton. There seems to be a lot of people who are going to be involved in this process of appointing a manager Is there the clarity of thought at the top of the club? It doesn't appear.
You
to
say
be
that,
way.
James, because in your paper this morning, I mean, Matt Law's story this morning, it's when your club is being made to look as foolish and as stupid as this, because the headline is Arteta faces an apprentice-style grilling for the Arsenal job. So Arteta is emerging as the leading candidate, but to get the job, he's got to go through round one of interviews.
With Lord Sugar?
Yeah, pretty much. You get to meet him in the end, I think, when you get to the end of this story. Head of football, Raoul Sanley, technical director, Edu. So that's one round of meetings for Mikel Arteta. And then if he gets through that, if he passes that test, then he's on to round two. And then round three, you get to be flown to America, you get to meet the Cronkies, and then they will finally approve it. Will Mikel Arteta settle for that?
Depends how much he would want the job. You would also think there'd be people at that club who would know him. I mean, look, there's nothing wrong with being thorough. You don't want to appoint a manager without any proper due diligence or thought. That seems a little bit excessive, but I think James has made absolutely the right point there. I agree with him. You can't win anything without good players. We were led to believe that Arsenal's recruitment pathways and policies are a lot better now than they were in the latter years of Wenger, and I think it will probably take 2 or 3 years for that to bear fruit. So I think we've got to wait for that, but you really need to hope that that is the case, because at the moment it's a mishmash of players who collectively are nowhere near good enough. So Arsenal I'm afraid, have got both problems to deal with. They need some good players, and they need the right manager.
Yeah, they certainly do. A draw at Norwich last weekend, defeat on Thursday night, wasn't it, against Brighton at the Emirates. Fans not happy there. I'd like to move on, Andy, to Villa and Leicester. And if we could just pause for a moment on the action on the field to talk about Ron Saunders, who passed away on Saturday, aged 87, of course, synonymous with one of the great Villa teams.
Absolutely.
Back in the early 80s.
Yeah, won the league title in 81. And if you remember then, he broke up that dominance of Liverpool. It's hard to recall how dominant Liverpool were at that stage in football. And Ron Saunders, Aston Villa, he built the team not only that won the league in 81, but went on to win the European Cup, obviously without him, in 82 when he fell out with the club over them altering his contract in mid-season, second half of the season. And obviously his great friend Tony Barton took them to the European Cup that year.
That story in itself is amazing, isn't it?
Incredible. I mean, it's hard to comprehend that. Yes.
And I think it was around the quarter-final.
I think.
It was a quarter-final.
Were they in the quarter-final?
It was also the one year that Doug Ellis wasn't chairman of the club as well.
Incredible. But you're right, it does. It's an incredible look. You think of the power of managers now. You think in terms of the earning power. I mean, imagine trying to change someone's contract, so going on to Jose Mourinho, they're just about to play a quarter-final of the Champions League and saying, sorry, your bonus is taken out and whatever. These managers, and in a way, Ron's passing, and it'll be a very, very emotional day today at Villa, because, he is a revered character there, and obviously went across, very quickly went across to manage Birmingham, sort of is respected all over the Midlands. And in a way, it's almost like he's one of the last of the old school. This is a guy who won the league title, an incredible achievement with Aston Villa. I suspect probably he wasn't on the pitch beating his chest. Nowadays you can't keep managers off the field of play. They go fifth in it and they're saluting the crowd for about 10 minutes after the game. Or they draw it home to West Brom and they're bowing in front of the crowd. I think Ron was.
Beat Chelsea at home, you're hugging ball boys.
Well, exactly.
Shaking hands with members of the press.
Exactly. But it's a huge circus nowadays. I'm not saying that they don't mean it. But there was a time then, you can just imagine it, just go home and go back to work, basically. Shake hands with your opposing manager, invite him down for a beer, and then off you go home with none of the adulation that managers demand now. So in a way, he symbolised that. But there's no underestimating in the pantheon of Villa managers and Villa figures. I mean, he's right up there, and you'll see that today.
The fact that when Villa fans talk about their great players. There have been some very good players who played for Villa in the last 20 years, but you talk to Villa fans and they will talk about Gary Shaw and Dennis Mortimer and Morley and Peter With. They are the players, and of course Nigel Spink, who came off the bench to replace Rimmer in the final. Those are still
he got them together. Yes.
Seen as great Villa legends. Those players.
And a good player for Portsmouth as well. I think he scored about 200 goals. I think in his career.
Yeah, Ron Saunders, who passed away at the age of 87 on Saturday. James, it is a big game this afternoon, Villa against Leicester. Brendan Rodgers tied to his new contract. Interest elsewhere, as we know, very obviously from Arsenal. We are told that there was interest as well from Tottenham before they fired Mauricio Pochettino. But why has he opted to commit himself until 2025 with this deal?
Well, firstly, it's another example of Leicester moving very quickly and very shrewdly. I mean, they look a very, very well-run operation there. But if you look at the players that he has got there at Leicester, I mean, why would you? Why on earth would you want to vacate those players and move to Arsenal? I know it's Arsenal. I know, historically it would be perceived as obviously a bigger club, but he's got one of the most exciting sort of crop of players in the Premier League there. And 1 to 11, his first 11 is absolutely outstanding. I mean, with the exception perhaps of Liverpool and City, it's the best in the league. And at the moment, certainly at the moment, they look the most likely challengers to Liverpool. And I think he sees a very bright future for them, and I think he knows that. I think he thinks he'll be able to win with them, and I think he thinks that if I do a good job here, perhaps it will lead to them. But I don't really think Rodgers is thinking too much beyond that. I think he'll be very excited about what he has. They play Liverpool on Boxing Day, don't they? They won't have the fixture congestion that the Cities and the Liverpools have got.
They have got Carabao. They have got Carabao.
Yeah, they can swallow that. But generally it's been a game a week, isn't it, for them? I mean, I think if they can keep their key players fit, I think they will. I'm not saying anyone will haul Liverpool in, but I think they'll stay there.
But they must have, for him to sign that length of time, they must have mapped out the future for Leicester City and said, we're not going anywhere. We want to be in the top four. This is where we belong. This is where we think we should be.
I think they did that when they took him from Celtic. Brendan's a very ambitious man, as we know, and a very shrewd man, and he will have his own mind. He will have his next move mapped out, I am sure, and why not, by the way. But when he came, he knew he was coming to. He knew that the move from Celtic to Leicester, or the move from Celtic to his next English club, was so important for him because he was still strangely rebuilding that reputation after what happened at Liverpool. So he knew that Leicester was important. So he went there he knew what was coming through the academy. He knew which players they were buying. So he knew that he was joining a club that was going to give him an opportunity to do exactly what he's doing now. And he will also know that when it's time for his next move, and there will be one, that has to come at the right point. And jumping ship after, what would it be, less than a year, would not have been a good look at all. And he will know that. So he will know that if he's got an opportunity to build on what he's doing with Leicester, I don't think he'll see out that contract. I don't think anybody thinks he'll see out that contract, but he'll get a good chunk into it, 2 or 3 years, and then when the next one comes along, then he's ready to go.
Well, Leicester will have covered themselves, I'm sure, as well. There was a £14 million compensation bill, I think, in his previous contract. I'm sure that's been hiked. But he will look and see what they have done in the transfer market. No one pushes Leicester around in the transfer market. No. They set a price and they will sell only if they want to sell, and we've seen that with Maguire and Mahrez.
And they recruit very well.
Yeah, they recruit very well. Very, very impressive stuff on and off the field at the moment at the King Power. Brendan Rodgers tied until 2025. OK, will these boys still be on the supplement table in 2025? I reckon, of course, they will be. Download the podcast from all the usual places. You can catch up with the show on demand. We're back next week, same time, same place, 10 o'clock. See you then.
Sky Sports. Feel it all.